hello. We are, I guess, not all of Collective Creativity, but kind of the core group who are here today. So my name is Evan Ifakoya.
My name is Roger H.
My name is Raisa Kabia.
Okay. Do we want to say anything about what Collective Creativity is?
No, I think we should play the
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
We're gonna play a clip by John Akomfra, and it's from the Stuart Hall project, which is we're just going to show this to you and then maybe talk over it for a little bit.
One of the moments in your life for which I have the most emotional sympathy is that moment when I see you as a young boy coming from Jamaica and you come to Oxford for the first time. Can you remember what that was like? What was that moment of encountering Britishness of England for the first time?
What I wanted to do was to get to another city. I wanted to get to London, and I wanted to get to New York. I wanted to get to the experiences that London represented. I was too black in my family. I was the outsider from the time I was born. So I couldn't rest on what I was given.
So, so why did we start Collective Creativity about a year ago now?
We started last year for July.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, but why? Because I think it's a conversation that you and I had.
so we were talking first, and we were just really frustrated, right? We were just having a lot of difficulty with our own getting acknowledgement for our own practices or getting opportunities, and we just felt that we weren't growing as artists as well, right?
Yeah, so Collective Creativity started because we are a group of, at the time we were working individually as artists, and we'd all kind of come out of art school, various institutions in London and around the country, and I think some of us had just had an exhibition, and then we were meeting up and we were talking, and we were kind of talking about our frustrations around this art world, I guess, that exists. And so Collective Creativity started as a space for us to meet, to talk about our own practice, but also to kind of talk and reflect and critique on other artists' practice and other kind of creative cultural production that we were interested in at the time.
Specifically queer space, queer
Yeah.
and trans space.
Yeah.
And of course, and of colour, right? That's
Yeah.
a big thing.
So it was what we called a QT pop only space. So that's queer, trans, intersex people of colour. So we quite explicitly made it a space, what we consider a safe space, and we meet at Tate once a month. And we have access to the space.
Tate don't know
one of
it
us,
anyway.
Tate don't know it, but one of us works there, so we kind of use that space. And so why did we decide to kind of?
Do you remember what happened? It was you were doing some sessions, and you said, okay, if anyone wants to chair a session, put in the
I
idea.
was
Right.
Yes.
And then I was like,
I remember.
I'm struggling. I've been to art school. I can't see myself reflected anywhere. I can't see it. I'm struggling. I've heard about some black artists. Why don't we explore this? Why don't we do a session? Why don't we teach ourselves? Why don't we go through some of the things that we were starting to uncover?
The conversation we were having was that it was funny that we actually, all of us, realised that we didn't learn about these black artists in institutions, in our art education, right?
Yeah.
So we began that journey of going to the Stuart Hall Library at Reddington Place, and then we were just having these conversations around that, right? Of like how we really need to create our own space. We're just sick of it, right? We're just frustrated, fed up, and something needs to change.
and that library, the Stuart Hall Library, was very much that space for us to learn, to meet, to share, and develop.
And have resources, right? Because
yeah,
it's also a really
and
good
have
space, it's free.
and have access. And I think as well, it was kind of around that point when you were like, hey, let's look more into this kind of this Black arts movement. And then we came across this essay by Stuart Hall.
Because I was in Manchester and I was holed up on my laptop and we were searching for articles, and I was always searching for maybe something that reflected a voice, reflected a critique, reflected something that I felt was missing. So I thought, it can't just be, Yinka Shonivar and a crucifix. Something must have come before.
Yeah.
What was that? Who was writing about it? Where is this information? And we came across Rachel Areen, and then Stuart Hall had written this piece. It was actually a speech.
It was a speech.
And literally formulating 3 post-war moments of Black British art in Britain, and categorising artists, postmodernism, and then what was going on and what had gone wrong as well.
And that was the first session we did.
Yeah.
In that particular series, because we did 2. We did it in
the
total.
one in January was the redefinition.
So we did 3 in total looking at the Black Arts Movement, but that one was the first one.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think at the time we were like, wow, this article is great. It's like really kind of highlighting some things for us, but then kind of, I don't know.
Just filling in a lot of gaps.
A lot of
right?
gaps. A lot of gaps, definitely. But then actually, I would say that kind of, 8 months or whatever down the line, I feel a little bit more critical, actually, of the essay and of Stuart Hall and the way that he kind of framed
or used artists as an example.
Yeah.
In what way? Like saying more.
Well, I mean, so we've kind of been going on this journey. We've been kind of looking a lot at archives, really looking at the work of these artists who are around kind of this Black arts movement and engaging with the artists themselves. Like so somebody called Lubaina Himid, who
the making visible.
Yeah, she runs an archive up in Lancaster, and we've actually been up to see her, and I've been reading a lot of her writings, and I know that she actually felt quite critical of Stuart Hall.
You're talking about that.
She actually felt quite critical of Stuart Hall and how he decided to frame these artists' work, and actually what that did is it ended up, I guess, not pigeonhole. Well, it did in a way kind of pigeonhole them. It did in a way kind of essentialise their work and kind of just kind of put it in this frame of being around a kind of socio-political context. And actually, what did that do to the work itself? And I think,
they didn't actually talk about the work, but it's about. I remember him always mentioning the lack of representations of Black bodies in culture has a massive impact on how we see ourselves and again cultural theory, and the use of Keith Piper, Eddie Chambers making this like incredible work very early on in like the late 70s and 80s. It was very much about like, this is racism, this is what's going on, and he used it as a very clear example to see that there was this new movement, there was this new politics that was very much changed from what had been going on in the post-colonial era, where people wanted to be part of the institution, but then this became a new bubble where people were against the institution. And you saw, like, when we went up to the archives in the Chelsea Library and Lubaina Hamid's archive, there's like lots of like posters, lots of things, and articles and writings, being very clear about their objectives, being very clear about this is a racist institution, this is a racist art world, they're pushing us out, but we don't want to be part of this. We are in resistance to this, resistance to disappointment.
So what you're saying is basically after reading Stuart Hall, getting an entry point, then we discovered all these other artists were saying these things, and there was this knowledge happening outside of.
And we felt an affinity with it, right? It was like
but also
echoing.
Just to bring back, because also Lubaina had that critique about the fact that Stuart Hall didn't mention women at the opening talk of the Shades of Black conference, right? And she said, you haven't mentioned any women, and this is half of the problem. Why this movement has faded, because if you don't mention half of it, you erase it.
Yeah.
So that was also really great to hear from her. She said that.
Yeah, and I don't know whether we got to it in the film, but then, you know, and I think why we also decided to include the film is, you know, even though we do have some kind of critique of Stuart Hall, it is kind of also important to remember that he was critiquing institutions as well. You know, he very much critiques Oxford and, you know, that space that.
And that was really refreshing to,
and
like,
it was.
to feel that, because we individually we all felt like isolated, didn't we? And then we met each other, and then we were like, this is great to find other people, but then we didn't see that reflected anywhere else, and then it was great to have that empathy to see that was critiquing.
And then, you know, I find it as well quite interesting that, you know, there's a new building being named after him. And because I know, here, and because it's something that I've felt, you know, whenever because I work at the Tate, and, you know, at universities, I'm so used to kind of going through these buildings, and there's all these names and all these, like, important white men around, you know. So for me, it's kind of refreshing and kind of nice to think that, like, oh, there's going to be this, like, Stuart Hall building, and, you know, for young.
Did you think he had to die for that to happen?
Well, yeah, he had to die for that to happen. It certainly wouldn't have happened in his lifetime, even though during his life he did do a lot of really important work for this thing called cultural studies, you know, that we're all supposed to be kind of interested in.
But I like that point you're talking about in terms of knowledge production, and realising that actually, you know, isn't this the question of cultural studies and its value and being important? It isn't about whether, you know, we should bring knowledge outside of institutions. Actually, that it's there and it exists, and it should be acknowledged. And like, we found that going through and meeting artists, and also reading articles that they'd written, because all the British black artists ended up being very political. And it's not a coincidence that that's.
And I think that's something else that we realise, is that no matter how many books we could read, how much theory we could study, that it was really about engaging with people's lived experience. You know, like talking with artists. You know, that's how we really found out about the history.
To get that picture and the nuances that were going on, because there was lots of like hidden histories. Because we're like, where's the queer stuff? Where's the queer stuff?
Exactly.
You know, and
the queer stuff.
The thing is, though, it wasn't like all. You know, it wasn't all fun. Remember when we had that session? It was just like really.
Yes.
That's the session. The second one that we did, the redefining the Black Arts movement.
Well. So there was a third session where we again were looking.
It was third.
Because we did two. The first one was looking at the Stuart Hall text. The second one was looking at Rashida Ream text. So then we kind of decided to do a third session, trying to kind of round everything up. And
that was in January, yes.
Yeah, this is in January.
That's the one I remember the most.
And for some reason, at this point, you know, because we were already engaging with artists, you know, people like Keith Piper, Ingrid Parks. These are artists who were actually involved in the movement. They've been kind of coming to our sessions, and so for this session in January, there was just quite a lot of people.
Cross-generational.
Yeah, cross-generationally, quite a lot of people came in, and so we did record that session, and so we'll just.
But also, it was so overwhelming to just have everyone show up. Because
it was overwhelming.
We've been doing these sessions, and I don't know how many we'd done, but we hadn't done that many. We'd started in July, and this was January, and we were doing them every month, right? And then we would just like be 5 to 10 people having a chat. And then this one was what, 40 people?
And we'd actually used an article by a writer called Morgan Quainton. It's called Post-Racialism, which kind of it touches on the Black Arts movement. It talks about people like Stuart Hall and Inova, and it's a really great article. You know, it's from Art Monthly. Well, I mean, it's you know, it has its failings, but I think it's a useful article. So I'll say that. But so here's a video of some of the highlights from the session.
This is gonna be good.
This is not going to be a presentation as such. This is really an open discussion, conversation. So the facilitators, that'll be me, Raji and Raisa, when she's here, we will kind of lead on with a statement or a question, and then we'll kind of open up to the floor.
In the professional sphere where I write as an art critic, there was a lack of criticism to do with black art. And I can say that because I've been writing for 3 or 4 years, and it's only the past year, because I have a few people that I know have been writing it into these places, that it's emerged again. And also, I noticed that there was a kind of malaise in some of the institutions that were founded in the 90s, that were at this high point of what was the culmination of the Black Arts Group's activity and like this new internationalism and globalisation. What has happened to INFA? What has happened to the Birmingham Arts Centre? So these are things that have to be tackled. So I think it wasn't me sort of saying, this is the final thing I'm there to say, it wasn't me sort of saying anything about the arts that's come before is somehow not valid or that work hasn't been done. It's just a way of saying, how do we write this into being? Look
at Steve McQueen as an example. Okay, Steve McQueen, I remember seeing his first film with this kind of middle-aged Caribbean man walking down the street with a plant on his shoulder. Even seeing that little film, I thought, this guy is special. I was at Goldsmiths, he came to Goldsmiths to talk. It was the only occasion the entire time I was there that somebody spoke to me and I got the impression that he understood what I was experiencing in that institution. And since then I followed him, you know, Would You Bear, The Stamp, all these kinds of things. Then he starts to make movies. He's making movies about IRA hunger strikers. He's making movies about sex addicts in New York. And then he's making movies about an enslaved man and slavery in general. He's someone who's clearly been to whatever interest in masculinity, the body, and what have you. You know, and I'm using him as one example, but there are so many other examples that one could choose. And I think, again, the idea that somehow we're being tethered to, you know, history and the archive and we can't move from it, I just don't understand.
Just to be clear, that we're using Morgan's article as a base. It's not just about the article, it's also the questions or the issues that come up from the article that we also are discussing. So I think it is good to have a healthy debate, but I think we have to also be aware that there are other questions about individuals in the room. So the first question that we've been talking about is, what does the Black Arts Movement mean now to young artists working today and to those involved in it originally? The next question was, is it possible to critique the current institutional system while working within it? Which actually what you were mentioning about artists being able to do what they want and making films about it and lots of different subjects. My question would also be, can you do that as an emerging artist? Or is that something that you come into being tokenized or representing some group and then you can maybe later on do that?
There have been stories built on constructions have been built on this scheme, and I'm perceived in relation to those constructions. Now, for me, this is right at the centre of this essay. You know, what are the images that have been framed for an emerging generation to step into? Now, do you feel that you have to be a representative figure for either another generation or for some, you know, and in a way, what the image was not actually defined for me in this essay.
I was at a party actually for this magazine at Christmas, and someone came up to me and said, "What's going on with the Black Arts Movement? What do you think of so and so and so and so?" And he just kept on. I was like, "Why do you think I know about these people?" And he hadn't read the article. He just assumed that because I was black, I knew. And he assumed that I'd be interested in Sonia Boyce's work, or he assumed that I'd be interested in reading Frantz Fanon. It's like there's a presumption that skin confers cultural interests or intellectual interests. And so I think, for me, it's that presumption that because of my skin colour, I will be interested in these certain things that for some people, maybe not the people around this table, have become associated with black arts. And that's the thing that I felt, well, I just want to disassociate myself from that expectation.
So you that power that we also then have, but there's two things. One is the isolation that you possibly experience in the institution, the problems that come with it, but the power, and then it's very direct from each student. I have been saved by my one black teacher, so now I'm in the position to maybe give that to another person.
So I'm in the opposite institution where we have 3 black staff, then the first year there's no black students.
Now, I'd just like to bring us back to a piece of work, because I think it's in the absence of a work or something. Because right now I've got, because Amanda's sitting in front of me, really favourite piece of work that I've got is the Red Riding Hood. You've used the phrase of intimacy, trying to get in touch with and engage with a particular body and pieces of work. Sometimes we have disappointment. That has been part of the Black Arts Movement. In fact, much of the work that's being produced at a particular period was responding to disappointment. That's what I'm hearing. That's the thing that runs through quite a lot of the work. And I'm sure that if we look at the work, if we brought it here, and what you're saying is that's happening in the institutions now, we will be able to draw that same thing through it.
I think that tension is productive, that's what I'm saying. I think actually it's indicative of an energy that is emerging, which is good because the energy tends to go round in circles. And we're having, what's clear to me is that there's a lot of really positive energy around this issue, around black arts, people of colour, etc. So that's, for me, that's a positive thing. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think, bring it on. This is what we need to understand how that energy works and how we can use it productively for change.
People are seen as a commodity, the way, like you say, like, I keep trying to say last time how people were working in the 80s and 90s, there wasn't these big poster, money-making artists at the time that had risen very quickly to fame that young students could look up to. It was almost like people just do work because they want to do it. Why not? We've got something to talk about. We want to, make the work they want to. We've got something to listen to, but we're just making the work. This is where we are. You fast forward to, the 2010s, 2009s. There's this massive student populations that come out of institutions. They have this goal, they have this idea, they want to make money, they want to be famous, and it's the I would say, the kind of neoliberalist way of looking at art as a commodity to make art and be successful. Very different to maybe radical socialist forms of art, where you're trying to destabilise those structures of power. And that's the kind of difference I see, and where you see how POC artists fall between those scales of politics, left or right, and what their end goals are. Is it the supportive, collective model of working, which I think what we were trying to establish, or the very individualist, I'm going to make it, I'm going to cut everyone loose because I want to get ahead and get a big show here and here, and I want to forget about any sort of identity politics or liberation or anything like that, or looking at capitalism. I just want to make the work that is seen as populist or seen as institutionally correct.
Cool. Yes, I think looking back on that video, we kind of noticed
it was
tense, didn't we? Yeah, I guess it doesn't come through in that highlight, but it was like a really heated conversation. Because like we were saying, people who were actually part of that movement were involved, and they were getting angry. People were getting angry, and just at this article that Morgan had written, and like the way he constructed
movement to pass on legacy. We're here, we're still struggling. What change has been made? Which are all valid questions, but I think when you're directly involved, and it can be hard to hear those questions. Also, there's a lot more involved that we didn't know. We don't know because of the way it's being represented. There isn't that information, so it's been great to have that conversation, which was really tense. And then, we were still having these conversations. It didn't mean that stopped happening, right? So then we got to learn much more about what actually took place and what was happening.
Yeah, and it was like that moment when Sonia Dyer was like, she's talking about Steve McQueen coming to Goldsmiths, coming to her school, and she's like, this teacher really got me. And then she goes on to be like, I don't understand what you guys are doing, just go do your work, why are you moaning, don't be tethered to the archive. I'm like, we need that archive to see a reflection of ourselves. How can we move forward if we don't know what's come before us? They're the same, and that's the most surprising thing.
Things are still urgently at stake, which is what Susan said as well.
And I would agree with that, but I do also feel that for us, there's also this kind of a new kind of particularity in the fact that we're queer identified and we're explicitly queer, because I guess there were artists who were part of that movement who were queer. Like, we know them that they were queer, but they didn't necessarily make that at the forefront of their work. They didn't necessarily engage with they didn't engage with it politically, and they also didn't participate in the queer exhibitions or the queer books and stuff like that. Every now and again somebody would, but generally the queer black artists, queer POC artists didn't really engage with it. Whereas for us, we're quite explicitly queer, and something we kind of
because
noticed.
those issues face us as well, right?
Yeah,
I think that was what was compromising the
becomes,
space.
It becomes the time though, doesn't it? It's like this politicization makes sense now. It says like, because when we were talking to Laverne and Hamid about her and Maud Salter when they were, you know, in a relationship for a very long time and making very queer work, and they were women, and they were black women, it wasn't the time. They said they couldn't handle it. It was just too hard being black women. So this is this period of time where politicization,
There's a lot of divisiveness.
yeah, divisive, being like racism is what we're fighting
That's
against.
what we're,
The depoliticization of art right now frustrates us because we are politicized as queer and as people of colour.
Yeah, so it was, I think that's definitely something we realised from that space and from like trying to engage with that movement, is there's still that kind of, there's still something that doesn't quite completely resonate with us, and there's still gaps there, and so I think part of our journey kind of moving forward is figuring out a kind of like querying that lens of, you know, this movement, and figuring out how we engage with that work through our own practices, but in a language that makes sense of where we're at now, I think. You know, taking in all of that stuff, you know, that people like Stuart Hall wrote, and Kabina Mercer, like other people who have written about
Claudette Johnson.
Yeah, Claudette Johnson, like other people who have written about the movement. And yeah, so I mean, I guess it's been a year, hasn't it, really? Since
I mean, we haven't had a chance to reflect together,
Yeah,
so it's funny that
it's
it's
really
just in time
think
for
about
years.
what's been going on and like what's next with collective creativity.
I mean, the thing is, when I look at this video, I mean, I still can't watch the whole thing because it's just
it's
too much.
to watch.
But watching this, like, just even now, reflecting back to how when we first started, at that point where we were making work and we were making good work, but we weren't being acknowledged, and we weren't having space, and we weren't having opportunity, to now, there's been so much change.
Yeah.
And that has been from that journey.
This development.
And from this development, from starting at a point of cultural studies to organising and sharing these conversations, which has been the most important thing, the cross-generational conversations.
Like the relationship between the archive, the research, creating space, and the conversation. You know, and the continued conversation with Sonia Boyce, and you know, again, us maybe actually holding the archive within our hands and doing something that pushes it forward to recreate those missing gaps of what can we do, how do we fill those gaps.
Yeah, and I think also, if you know, kind of going back to this idea of looking back to a year ago to now, I think that this space that we've created has also kind of nurtured us to develop our individual practices, because if we look at, you know, we're all kind of, even though we kind of operate collectively, you know, we all have individual practices. You know, I kind of work in performance video, you as well, performance, and you know, you're kind of writing and photography and textile-based work, and we've all kind of had exhibitions recently, have performances coming up. You know, I'm doing a performance tonight, you're doing, you know, we're both going to Berlin. It's like, so this space is kind of, you know, even we're working collectively, it's also kind of nurtured our individual practices, hasn't it, really?
And this big project with Sonia and
and
Chelsea,
kind of, and initiating these conversations has, you know, because I remember one of the questions Sonia asked us at a meeting is what do you want? You know, and it was exactly this, to be in conversation with them, to kind of develop these kind of relationships with artists who weren't our tutors but could have been, and now we are engaging with them. You know, now we are kind of doing this project with Sonia at Chelsea, working with the archive, working with students there, and unarchiving and kind of destabilizing the archive that exists there, and thinking about how filling in the gaps, you know, kind of developing this kind of project that we've been starting.
Decolonising the art institutions.
So I just think it's amazing, because I never would have envisaged that when we first started there.
No.
We first started there saying we need to make change, we're frustrated, things have to change. And now things aren't changing, and we're making our own change. That has been amazing.
Well, it's coming up to 10 to 1.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we've kind of
talked a lot.
Yeah, we have talked a lot. I mean, I guess we could see if anybody has any questions. Yeah. Or anything that makes sense.
Do you find, because I mean, I work at Whitechapel, but also I work as an arts consultant with artists on different levels. and all of that. But I kind of find, because my whole introduction into especially post-colonial theory was here through David DeBosa. It was part of my art history program, and that kind of opened my eyes a hell of a lot, because I didn't even know anything about this area of art or anything. And then I was lucky enough to work with Innova afterwards, and they Stuart Hall and everything. I've been to loads of talks and everything, everywhere. I've met all you guys through that network. But I do still feel that as, you know, artists of colour, queer, you know, there is this constant burden of representation, you know, and it's like, how do we get away? I mean, okay, yes, we know who we are, you know, but why do we have to always feel that that's all we can do?
Essential.
You know, it's like, how do we move forward? You know, this is 2014. We're still asking these same questions. You know, we find there's only certain, well, I mean, I work in Whitechapel. I mean, the only kind of colour exhibition since I've been there in 2009 was the Asian photography show. And a lot of the shows, I can't really relate to them. As a person of colour, myself, queer, whatever you want to call, you know, I can't really relate to it, and I kind of feel, you know, who's responsible, you know, how do we get the institutions, how do we make them responsible, not to feel like we're tokenised, get away from the tokenism, but how do we actually move forward with it? You know, you're a group, collective, that's fantastic, you've all got your, you know, you can support each other. I feel it's important, like groups like yours, is to kind of expand, work collaboratively, and you somehow, I mean, it's like, how do we, you know, that is my constant question. It's like, how can we get away from this constant burden? I mean, I've curated shows, and it's like, you know, I'm not necessarily going to curate a black, you know, it's like, don't assume, you know, that, and it's, you know, it's like, how do we? You know, how, you know, are we always going to be asking the same questions? Stuart Hall was amazing, all these amazing writings, and we can refer to them. But there is still that problem.
I think institutions need to change.
Well, yeah, of course. But it's like, how do we, you know, kind of, I mean, I feel like being at Whitechapel, I'm kind of made a visible change in the sense on the floor, but it's up the top, you know, to make, you know, and that's the thing. You know, and it's a burning question. But I think it's fantastic what you guys are doing, honestly, because I think more artists need to work collaboratively. I think it's really important that you have that support structure, because if you don't support each other, institutions aren't going to, unless they make some kind of radical change with the way they structure, how they fund their, you know, projects, and how they, you know, actually, you know, use artists in a positive way, not just saying, oh yes, I'm going to be doing representation of Asian, you know, it's like, no, this is the thing.
It's that thing of like, do you, the double burden of categorising yourself as POC or as black, and then thus ghettoising yourself, and then no one ever seeing, always limiting, and no one ever seeing your work outside of that isn't actually reference or talk about culture in a much broader spectrum. Somehow your experience only relates to other POC experiences. I mean, that's what like Morgan was saying. It's like everyone expected him to know Frantz Fanon and Sonia Boyce, but they weren't interested themselves. I don't know if you got that point in that quote, but they were like, oh, what's going on? There's this a lack of this like link to being like, why is it that only the white experience of art is seen as the universal one? And I think that's something that we're both, like all of us are we've talked about, I think, a lot in these sessions about not wanting to be just about the oppression and just about the liberation. And I mean, that's some of the things that Sonia Boyce was trying to get out of us, was like, well, where do you want to go forward? What does your work mean outside of that? And again, always going that bit further. You can't just be like, oh, we're oppressed, or this happens, or we're black, or we're queer. Like, it has to be much more than that. There has to be nuance for it to matter and for it to be good work.
Definitely.
But it's a necessary journey to go through, because those are issues that you're all constantly coming up against, even if you don't want to be.
And if you're isolated at art school, it's the only thing you can think about, right? And then the teachers are telling you, oh, it's too subjective, stop doing that, it's too political, stop that. But it's the thing that's driving you. And I think the moment when you start working collectively or meet other people with similar experiences, you can go beyond that.
And that's when you can let it go a little bit.
Oh, I've done that. I looked at that.
And
I
to
know
see that
that
this
now.
has been a journey, for sure. And also it was necessity that we came together. It wasn't necessarily that we were like, let's do this, it's going to be fun. We had to, because we can't face this individually. We have to be
No, but
collective.
I think it's really, my hats go off to you guys, because I think it's really important that, you do have that support, because otherwise it's a bit of a shit journey, as an individual, if you're not having any kind of support whatsoever, because you're hitting these brick walls because of how people feel you should be, how you feel your practice should be. You need to have that voice to represent yourself how and when you want it. So.
And about creating space.
Yeah, totally. Well, that's totally important, and I think it's just that idea of decanonizing how art is getting out of that canon. We have to always be constantly critiquing, even though no disrespect to the art canon. I mean, I love a lot of Picasso and all of that. Don't get me wrong, but I do feel that everyone needs to. I feel art needs to be accessible on all levels, regardless of where you're from. So.
Did you say you had some images of some screenshots?
Oh yeah. Do you think there are any other questions? Yeah.
Because something about Whitechapel, even the authority, we deliberately placed it back in the 80s at the center in Whitechapel for the reason that you said. But as we're talking, I remember the myth of Sisyphus. I don't know if you heard the myth of Sisyphus. Sisyphus was punished, an everlasting punishment, to push a big boulder up a hill. And when he got up on the hill, it rolled back on again. And he had to in perpetuity. And the conclusion I've come to, having spent 49 years in England, is that every generation has to be a Sisyphus. You've got to push your own boulder. Because the boulder has rolled down, it keeps rolling down. As we're talking, I say, my God, you've got to be your own Sisyphus. You've got to keep pushing that boulder. All I can do on the side is to encourage you and say, hey, keep going. But and it's not the destination, it's the journey. The process is the way you get the pleasure from. It's not the destination, but it's the journey. So therefore, one has to build up a kind of a mindset, a kind of a gritty, tough mindset, because it's going to be tough. Especially Juggler said, we don't struggle, there is no progress. So you got to be a man for struggle, because that's what Stuart Hall is into, struggle. Struggle of ideas. You've got to struggle for your ideas. These won't come shape because you're against the system.
But it has been useful to look at legacy and see the mistakes or the resolutions or the ideas that politically people have organised around and learn from that and gain some insight as well. So it's a bit of both. It's a bit of, this is our battle, but we also learn from what's happened before. Because often you just feel so disconnected that you think you're the first people to face this, you're the only ones, but you're not.
And I also wonder if that's part of that cycle, is because people think they are the only ones to have faced that, so they don't kind of think about the archive and think about what's kind of come before, whereas we're in this very kind of privileged position in a way to be able to engage with the archive, to be able to use it and actually think about, okay, so we can learn from that and how can we kind of move forward. Kind of.
But it's been difficult going through that archive too, remember?
The institutional archives, definitely.
There's lots of barriers.
Any more thoughts, questions?
Any more
reflections?
questions? Join the conversation.
Oh, yeah.
I just have a thought on the sort of relations that you're speaking of, particularly in the art world, and particularly the politicization of the body, this representation and this automatic politicization that comes with it, and it goes, all matters of aesthetics, culturally all the way to the political. But I feel as if that relation isn't necessarily as binary as we're used to thinking, isn't necessarily this sort of dichotomy between artist and institution, or canon in here, or queer and not queer, or black and not black. Because those systems of relations, if we really look at them in the face, work both ways as well. So it would force us to have a conversation also with black artists and with black audiences, who have a presupposition that this does not relate to me unless it's represented in front of my face. So while you have a canon that doesn't allow for the acceptability of Black queer art, you also have an audience of Black queer people that don't allow accessibility to anything other than Black queer art. And so I think that's why your system of relation and dialogue is essentially important, because I don't think it's far-reaching to say that these connections that you're saying that you're finding by building community may actually be wider, as you're suggesting, than is first thought of. Of course, the point of entry would be the exact representation. I am this, this, and this. But then discovering that these commonalities, especially when we're talking about hegemony and power and all these systems of relation are pervasive. And those systems survive on our essential ideas that we must be what we're represented as. That's how they continue to exist, and we continue to re-articulate them in everything that we do. And I feel like until we and it's not my theory, I'd go to like Fred Moten and Stefano Hardy, and basically until we establish some sort of indifference to that representation will continue to govern us. And it's not a disengagement politically, but it's almost a disengagement from playing the game of representation, which I think, I'm not an artist, but I feel that's what art essentially does as a mission, is sort of shake this up and disengage. But that's just a thought.
I think we've been in constant dialogue about that, about
the burden of representation. Yeah.
But can I ask a quick question? If it's just I'm curious how you think about this. This old debate about whether art should be political, whether art already is political. I'm not too deep in that. But would you, going back to that person that says, well, what do you want? Would you want it not to be? Would you want not to be queer person of color?
No.
Would you want it not to be that representation?
Zinzi has said this. She said, what would happen? What would the work? What work would you make? Or what would the work be if you weren't queer and you weren't POC? Where would you go?
I'd be making flowers.
Making flowers.
Nice landscapes.
I don't know. I feel like I don't even feel like wasting my time answering that. Like I appreciate what you're saying, but I feel like this is the body that I have. Yeah. This is the life that I live, and while I'm here right now today, I'd rather engage with that than imagine some kind of alternate universe where I know some people do that because that's their kind of coping strategy. That's how they want to engage with their practice is by thinking about that alternate reality. But for me, the making the art that I do is really healing. Like it's really therapeutic. You know what I mean? So it's useful.
That's what I'm leading at.
Yeah, like it's useful. I need to do this.
Because when you look at that abstract space, the tension you're actually feeling is actually the productive tension that makes who you are.
Yeah.
So I guess that's what I'm sort of going with that.
No, I get you, definitely.
Making art to survive rather than making art to make money.
Yeah. I think it's more about wanting to change the structures of power that make it difficult for us, rather than just changing ourselves and adapting to that.
Can I just bring in one more? You talk about spaces, because I met you, Evan, remember at the 198.
Oh yeah,
198 Gallery does really it's an amazing space.
Maria's said to us to
Because remember, did you do your Opie Laurie? Opie Laurie is another amazing artist that's doing some really good.
I was part of some of those conversations. Again, quite heated conversations.
I was on the panel. That was another heated conversation. Because there was Michael McMillan.
Oh yeah.
I wasn't there.
And Kamaka.
It's Opie Laurie's.
No, I remember
another heated. But I think we need to have more.
Of course.
But that's what it's all about.
Of course.
Should I show that? Because we skipped over. There was this last bit of the Stuart Hall film that I really wanted to show.
Okay.
We skipped over because we carried on talking.
Okay. It's like 1 o'clock.
It is 1 o'clock.
Yeah, it's 1 o'clock.
It's supposed to be until 1:15 now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I think think I closed it. I didn't realise you wanted to. Yeah. I mean,
so everyone's performing tonight.
Can we just leave it? It just feels like it's not going to work right now. I guess I have to now. Jeez. Freaking hell. Yeah, no, I'm actually performing tonight and for 4 nights. So you can all take a flyer. Yeah. Art and Chat. I'm doing this like kids TV show thing, but I really kind of broke down and that's why I have to run pretty much now. But yeah, I think unless anybody has any further final thoughts or questions,
What the guy said about they're trying to read fans for the book on Blacks and White Masks, and I think just talking to Popper with the part of it in Popper and to Kuhn about structural silent revolutions and finding information that disconfirms your theory as opposed to one that confirms it.
Yeah.
Because Stuart Hall was a critical theorist. If you look at black intellectual, history of black intellectual, we have to be critical of the system. So therefore, and one of the things I find is the sort of emotionalization of the debate. And we got to, it's not about us, it's about the battle of ideas. That when people, the thing is when someone said, okay, I'm a PhD, and someone said, I don't agree with your thing, and they withdraw, emotional. Wrong. Because if you are a PhD and you reach at the top of the society, expect criticism. Because your ideas are up in the public domain. You've got to be criticized. Why do you take it emotionally? You've got to come back with your own counter ideas. Because that is what Stuart Hall was about.
Yeah. That's how you grow.
That's how you grow. That's how knowledge grows. So forget about this thing about, and that's what you find about people are not debating the issues. They're drawing into their sort of silos and get all their own groups that agree with them. And that's why we have the problem now. Because there is no debate.
Exactly.
And the system
and that's why we set up this event, because it's called Critical Reflections on.
It's got to be critical. That's what it was all about. It's got to be critical.
Oh yeah, no romanticising, no.
That's another issue we had with the Black Arts Movement and how it was represented.
Because we were trying to, we were criticising it and actually quite annoyed that why did this happen and why is there no sort of handing over batons or what has happened that Sonia Dye was talking about how, or some people saying, oh, we got taught about the Black Arts Movement at college. And I said, well, we didn't, and we're angry about that. But no romanticising, because it wasn't some airy-fairy, happy, we're all political, radical. Like, things did go wrong, and people did fall out with each other, and disagreed.
Because in the 80s, we had I'm saying we, part of the Black movement, at London University, Professor Barbara Teaser was going to research in the Black community. And we formed a critical research group around her because wanted to present to us the hypothesis, the methods she was going to use, and whatever. And that was every month. Because she was presented, she was going to do this research on our community.
And what was this called?
Barbara Teaser, Thomas Craven's unit, Professor Barbara, she's gone now.
Okay.
I think Anne Phillips is not a professor there now. But in those days, we had a critical group to analyze those research methodologies. And we need to bring that back again. I mean, twin people are coasting. I mean, it's all hunky-dory and all this stuff. We got to come back to, if we got to be true to Stuart Hall's sort of legacy and his philosophy, we got to come back to that, to those days again.
Do you want to wrap up?
No, I don't. Did you? Yeah, I think we'll wrap up here then. Yeah. Okay.